All right, so we are back at MidDay Café. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Mike Giannotti. I'm a principal technology specialist here for Microsoft, and I am joined by my colleagues today. I'll go in the order of presentation slash participation. So, Scott, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Scott Moore. I'm a Teams technical specialist.
Sue Wenzel, still a team specialist.
Still. Kendra?
Kendra Burgess. I'm a business intelligence specialist.
So we have got a great topic today. I'm very excited about this. It's going to be a single topic focus around Operator Connect. But before we do, I thought we would start off our session with providing some people something very useful. So this comes to us from the book of useless information.
Bring it on, Daddy.
We're gonna bring on a
Let's hear
little
it.
useless info each week.
Let's hear
If
it.
we're gonna give you something useful, we got to do something useless. Which, all right. So, keeping your cool, and I did not know this. Rubber bands last longer when refrigerated.
How long do they last when they're not? Because they must last a very long time when they're not refrigerated.
Well, they last a long time, but when you put them in the refrigerator, they'll last even longer, it says. And then lastly, on the keeping your cool, it says some Eskimos have been known to use refrigerators to keep their food from freezing. There's your useless information for this week.
Yeah, you can't make that
So I wonder if the Band-Aids in the refrigerator has something to do with moisture, because typically Band-Aids, they're, I guess the bane of Band-Aid, or not Band-Aids, but rubber bands is they get dry rot.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. This is the anti-dry rot.
Right, the moisture.
Okay. I want to raise up hands out there. Any woman that's going to put rubber bands in the refrigerator, please raise your hand because it's not here.
I see all men in my shop refrigerator. All my rubber bands are going in now with my cheer wine to keep me happy.
When will Samsung come out with a little compartment for rubber bands? I don't know. Maybe that's the next innovative activity. It's a home office supply lifetime extension program in the refrigerator.
And don't forget, if you live up in the Arctic Circle during winter, get your food warmer refrigerator.
Well, because you can control the temperature. Sure, I can see that.
There you go.
All right. So enough of our useless knowledge. We have some real useful info today. And this is really focusing, going out into that whole Teams voice for calls and all that. And it's around Operator Connect. So with that, I'm going to shut my mouth because I am useless, and I'm going to hand that over. Scott, you want to pick that up and start talking?
Sure.
I'm going to mute myself while I eat. I've had no breaks today, so.
So we wanted to talk about Operator Connect today. So I'm going to share my tenant and give a little preamble around what Operator Connect is. So Operator Connect, it's in public preview now. It's a new way to get dial tone in the phone system in your tenant. So we know previously you had the ability to do, calling plans and then direct routing, but Operator Connect is really kind of a combination of both. So it really boils down to where your carriers actually have the ability to act as a go-between, because some carriers have already been doing their version of direct routing as a service, as well as carrying, being a SIP trunk carrier. But now they have that ability that you can port numbers to them or provision numbers from them from area codes and number availability that they have in your location. And it's now basically, it automatically shows up in your tenant. So originally, and I'm going to show you guys, so now there's a new tab under your voice tab in the 365 tenant. So you can click on that, and it's already grown. So this was announced a couple of weeks ago. I believe there were 7 carriers out there then. It's already grown to 11 now. So you see these carriers that are out there today. So all of these carriers on the back end, they've partnered with Microsoft to be able to provide dial tone services, as I mentioned before. in your in your tenant.
So I'd like to just give some real world examples. For example, for those customers that are, for example, with NTT and maybe they have a Cisco IP phone, before we would have to bring in direct routing, which required some hardware configuration. So that way you can continue to use as is. But now, if you want to replace the Cisco with Microsoft Teams, you can still continue to function with NTT. I do think, and this will be my one wisdom of my one, probably the most profound thing I'm going to say today, is that I do wish they would have named it something differently. You know, Operator Connect did not get me excited at all. Had they called it Carrier Connect, that would have been a whole different game. I think and there are some people probably watching this that might not have given it the time of day because of the name, but this is based on carriers.
Right. I tend to agree, definitely. So we do have these carriers, / operators that have availability now. There will be new carriers that will be coming into the fold. So this is what we have now. I'm going to kind of walk through a little bit of a demo of how you actually sign your tenant up for working with these carriers. I've actually already done this with a couple of carriers. I'm going to pick one that I haven't worked. This is actually one of the newer carriers that's shown up more recently. So typically what you'll do is you'll just click on that carrier, click on the name. You'll see that's bolded. And that'll take you to another screen specifically for that carrier. It's going to show you the availability of where those carriers, what countries they can provide carrier services for. So for here, for instance, we'll click on United States. And then you're going to click on the operator can contact me. So you definitely want to put your name in, put your name there. It'll populate, I've already got my information populated in Edge. With Microsoft as my domain, because I'm actually want to be contacted through here since this is actually a demo tenant phone number. You can put in your company size. I'm just going to put in 10 to 24 people. Click on this, agree to the terms, and add as my operator. And you'll see once I click on that, it's actually going to show that under my operators. So I've already done this for a couple of other carriers that are out there now. So you'll see Pure IP, Intrado, NTT. A New Wave is now one of the newer ones that I just added there. So what's going to happen on the back end is these carriers will get a notification from that, and then they will do an outreach out to that name and identity that I provided in that outreach. And what's happening on the back end is they will reach out, they will, start a sales conversation with that person who's made the contact and kind of gather requirements, talk through their specific offerings, because you will actually see each carrier has already been doing this for a while. So they're going to be able to do trunking services. As I mentioned before, they could also do direct routing as a service. Now they can do Operator Connect. I've also seen, and in my conversations with some of these other carriers, they can do some things around on-prem integration. So some of these guys do have capabilities around on-prem integration for legacy scenarios where you may still have analog. So we do know that some of these carriers do have other relationships in place with on-premises-based SBCs. So they can also do turnkey deployments of the actual transformation process. And naturally, I also call out, they also have, as part of this, as part of porting, they also have project management and porting coordination as part of this this service. They also, a lot of these guys can also do managed services from a day two perspective. So they also, as part of their portfolio, have that ability that once you transfer these telephone numbers or you provision telephone numbers from them, they also have that ability to manage that on the back end as part of a day two managed services agreement. But that's all handled through those guys. So it's all part of the conversations that you have with them. We try to stay agnostic and just say all these carriers have different capabilities. So it's definitely a word to the wisdom, word to the wise of speak with these carriers, see what their services are, and see where they can fit with the requirements that all the customers have.
Yeah, the big thing that we did was adding it to the Teams administration.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
That's the big deal.
I do have a slide deck I'm going to share after we go through this. And I'll go through some of those different comparison points between direct routing and Operator Connect. A couple other things that.
Real quick, it sounds like since we have the hookups and it's now in the admin, really you set this up, they contact you when they light the services up on their end, then it's just lit, correct?
Pretty much. It's basically, yeah, once they do that, because they have access to the tenant on the back end, they're actually doing this through Azure on the back end. That's part of their requirements to be an Operator Connect carrier. There's very minimal information that they need as far as a demo environment. Naturally, for a production environment, there would be some deeper conversations around porting and coordination of porting of DIDs, telephone numbers. But from a demo perspective, it's very easy. And it's also pretty easy for production.
So what would be the use case where people would want to set this up? What's that specific?
So really around the use cases, there's actually a couple of different use cases here. It really boils down to where customers get to a point where they say, we're ready for a technology refresh of going to a different technology for our dial tone. However, they would like to do Teams as that primary mechanism for telephony capabilities. And we see a lot of customers now today say, I don't want to make that investment with any more on-premises hardware. So we may have a legacy PBX. We may not want to invest in on-premises based SBCs or even SBCs, in the cloud, because you can do, cloud-based SBCs as well. I've worked with some customers prior to coming to Microsoft, and they said, we don't want to have to manage SBCs. We don't want to do that. We just want to be able to have a pure cloud-based service where we may pay a fee and it's managed in the cloud. So that's really the best use case.
Yeah, I think early on, a common use case I think we're going to see is what I mentioned at the beginning. Somebody wants to migrate to Microsoft Teams for voice. This allows them to keep the same dial tone they've been using.
Gotcha.
That's true. I was working with another customer earlier this year. They're working with a carrier. They were actually on a competing platform and doing some investigation to come into Teams. And that carrier actually told them, well, we can actually just go ahead and give you direct routing as a service and just repoint the existing numbers that we actually manage for you, where I would say that are bounded to us as an alternative. So they were actually had that ability to pivot them off of a different on-premises based PBX platform and basically repoint those numbers as a direct routing as a service model. So that's a different but similar scenario, and that just kind of dovetails into what's coming now with Operator Connect. Same scenario.
All right.
So let me kind of walk through a couple of other things here in the tenant. So as you can see here, a couple of numbers. We have phone numbers that are already provisioned. Once the numbers show up, they're actually going to show up under phone numbers. So this is really cool. So this is also the same place where you would see your calling plan numbers. You also see numbers that are populated from the carriers that have already been provisioned through those carriers. So it's pretty simple. All you have to do is basically click on the number. You can see it. I've already assigned some of these numbers to end users. So you just click on the number, go through the provisioning process here, and you can manually do this, in the tenant. You can see I actually assigned this number to my demo identity in the tenant. Pretty much the only prerequisites as part of the provisioning process with the carrier is they need to know area code, city, and also is to make sure that there is an emergency location that's already defined for these locations. I will say another thing is there is a cost savings that's kind of a hidden cost savings. Because with direct routing, and if you're going with SIP trunking, you typically have to work with a third-party E911 provider. With Operator Connect, these operators are already bundling third-party E911 on the back end. So that's already bundled into their services. So you would still need to go through location identification that you would need to, as part of a direct routing deployment, and do your LIS integration to identify locations and networks for those locations. But they carry a lot of that burden on the back end already in their infrastructure. So, but as you can see here, I've already assigned this number. It's pretty easy. You can unassign, reassign, do all that from the Teams Admin Center. It's very easy to do. So you can do this.
Scott, quick question. So you're showing it here in the admin console, which is great. But if I'm doing like a mass piece, is there like scripting available for that? How do we do that in bulk?
So as far as I know, I believe you can also do that through PowerShell.
Okay.
So you should be able to do that through PowerShell, but that's also another great question. The carriers themselves also have the ability to do some mass provisioning on their end as well.
Oh.
So I do know that some of the carriers that we're working with, they have their own provisioning capabilities that they can do as part of mass migration. But that will differ per carrier because they've developed their own provisioning mechanisms to do that. So trying to think of other things to show you. It's so straightforward. It's very easy. Maybe the best thing to do is to segue to the PowerPoint presentation. Or do you guys have any other questions so far?
I'm good.
So let me stop presenting here, and I'll do my presentation. And these are what I'm going to show you is just a couple of slides that we have as part of our internal pitches around Operator Connect. But I'll walk through these. So this is the first slide. So it's really a comparison around direct routing and calling plan. So I'm going to go through these one by one and kind of talk through the nuances of how these things are approached from an Operator Connect perspective, as well as how they're approached from a direct routing perspective. So the first thing, definitely take note of from the program type, as we mentioned before, Operator Connect is a programmatic approach, to operator provided calling rather than with direct routing. There's no program involved. It's really around direct routing is done through certified SPCs, whether that's an on-premises based SPC or it's a cloud-based SPC or direct routing as a service. So it's not as programmatic, and it's a little more manual. There's a lot more manual things that you definitely have to set up as part of a direct routing deployment, rather than it being programmatically done on the back end with Teams and Operator Connect. You guys have any additional feedback there? Any thoughts?
Straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. As far as interconnection, we talked about that. So with Operator Connect, it's actually done through the Azure peering services. For voice, there are some, as I mentioned before, there's also some dedicated APIs with each carrier that the carrier actually interoperates with Microsoft and Teams Admin Center. So they actually set up the trunk on the back end and do all the validation. Whereas with direct routing, you do have to do that TLS connection over the internet from the on-premises SPC or the cloud-based SPC to Teams. There's a carrier tenant for setting that up as what we call a super trunk. And there's definitely a little bit of customer configuration in direct routing. Next thing is around number provisioning. We talked about that. So provisioning is through the APIs, as we mentioned before. You can see those numbers that are provisioned in the tenant. So you have that capability to provision in the tenant, also through carrier APIs. They can do some provisioning as part of their services. Though in direct routing, that is actually done through PowerShell as part of that. So when you do provision numbers for direct routing, it is done via PowerShell. It's not heavy, but it's definitely there. It gives you a lot of flexibility with PowerShell, because I've seen a lot of mass transformations where we can do PowerShell and we can do boom, 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 and I've seen thousands of people actually being provisioned through PowerShell with direct routing. It's just a matter of the comfort level with the technology and your comfort level with PowerShell. Capabilities in Teams Admin Center, as you saw before, I showed you that we have that presence in the portal. You can select the operator. We walked through that. In direct routing, that is not available. That's not there today. So there is a distinction there. From a customer experience perspective, we mentioned that the numbers are visualized in the portal. As the operator numbers, you can assign them, through the portal. However, in direct routing, you do have to do that through PowerShell. And you also do need to create some voice policies that would need to be additional configuration with direct routing as part of your voice policies. Any thoughts there? Additions? Data sharing. So with data sharing, all this analytics there for numbers. So your CDR, CQD, that's there as part of Operator Connect through the APIs. The carriers also have some capabilities around some of the CDR, CQD data that they can actually see from their perspective. So, a good example there is you'd say, well, I'm working with NTT or our peer IP, and I'd like to see how much consumption I'm coming through them. They can provide you reports of the carrier utilization naturally for them. For direct routing, then you are relying upon the CDR and CQD data that's natively there in the tenant today, rather than getting that from your carrier. From a support perspective, your first line of support for these numbers is your tier 1 is going to go through your Operator Connect model. So if there were some issues, then you would escalate to the carrier, to the operator, and then they would be that first line of support, and then they can handle any change management and updates through their channels, as well as any SLAs. They will have their own SLAs between them. There's also SLAs between that operator and Microsoft for that availability. With direct routing, then you are relying upon naturally working through your SIP carrier or your PSTN carrier for any issues there, as well as possibly a managed services provider that may be managing that, or you're managing that on your own, as well as your SBC manufacturer for support for the SBC. And you do have capabilities of escalations through M365 support or Premier support if there's any issues for numbers through direct routing. And there's no SLAs in place for direct routing.
That seems to me a biggie, right? Especially as we look at mission critical, large enterprise. If there's no SLA, this is kind of that really you're rolling your own. So it's best effort.
There are SLAs for M365 and Office 365. It's just there's nothing specifically around, right? Definitely.
This piece, which is a vital point of connection, right?
Right. Definitely.
Yeah.
So we do see that this is definitely much more advantageous from an Operator Connect perspective. It definitely gives you that capability that if there were some issues, then you can actually engage and escalate through the operator. So they definitely have some skin in the game there.
Good.
So from a management perspective, we talked about the dedicated management capabilities there in the portal. So you do have that there. That also, you'll have those portal and API capabilities when it becomes generally available. For direct routing, you do have some delegated admin capabilities as well as RBOC capabilities today with access required in the tenant, so that certain RBOC users have the ability to provision telephone numbers, or they'd have Teams administrator, which will basically be global admin for everything. Total cost of ownership. So it is as a service with Operator Connect. So it's definitely modeled, it's delivered by the operator. You will see some different pricing models from each operator due to their, the breadth of the services that they offer around that. But you will see that with direct routing, the total cost of ownership is going to be the on-premises based SBC, as well as operated by the customer and or the hosted managed service for the operator.
Many customers are really looking for a cloud solution.
They really are.
And we have to have a piece of hardware on-prem, kind of puts a damper on things.
And I'll talk about these a couple data points I'll make here. That there's still a lot of requirements around, and there's still a lot of benefits of having on-premises based SBCs. I do see a lot of customers. I've been doing this for a long time. Some customers still have legacy PBXs. They may still have, and a lot of things also boil down to still having, on-premises analog requirements. So that's where the SBCs will shine, because the on-premises based SBCs Still have capabilities around analog, whether you're talking doorbell systems, elevator systems, alarm systems, paging and PA systems. They have those capabilities of being able to interconnect with them. I also see some carriers, or actually some customers, they may still have PRIs. So SBC.
What's that?
Basically, it's a voice T1. So your old primary rate interface. So some customers may still be on TDM or voice PRIs rather than already converting over to SIP trunking. And the best analogy is it's basically dial-up for voice rather than being on, SIP is almost like a broadband connection.
Right.
So so SBCs do have the ability, if they're properly ordered and configured, to be able to support interconnectivity of both. The SBC manufacturers make those that have PRI interfaces, but they all support native SIP integration as well. So you'll still see some customers they're part of that transition. And they may have SBCs in those locations where they have PSTN integration, what we call local breakout. I've worked with a lot of customers I've seen customers may have 900 locations and they still would put an SBC in those locations. But there's also opportunities of consolidating those. I've also worked with customers whom have gone through the process of consolidating that footprint of having 900 PSTN locations down to regional locations with SIP. So it's all based on where they are in that roadmap for their own infrastructure. But I've also seen a lot of customers, make the conscious decision, hey, we're ready to, start looking at something that's a little more cloud-based and shifting the paradigm and moving towards something that's really more cloud-based. And this is where Operator Connect does fit in. And another thing to think about, though, because I've worked with some other customers, once they start to look at the workloads for end users and you kind of separate what I call your user-based workloads, your user-based workloads are more appropriate for these Operator Connect scenarios, whereas your facilities-based workloads, that's where the SBCs can still shine until you can, look at other and alternative solutions around those things, around where you still have analog requirements.
So what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like really where we're going to see where direct routing is there really hinges on the SPC, where if you still have analog, you haven't moved some of those systems are still up, they're not updated and you need to connect. And also where they're just doing their return on investment, they have capital investment and they say we're writing it for X period. That's our budgetary cycle for this until we look to move out. We have to gain, I forget, what do they call that again? I'm not the financial guy.
Capitalization.
Capitalization.
Yeah.
Capitalization.
Definitely. I've been working with a lot of customers where they basically will say, well, we just invested in another PBX platform. So it may be, 4 or 6 years before we're ready for a refresh, and we have to capitalize that and write it off.
I do have to point this out. I thought this was fun. Sue, did you see in the transcript when you said the cap, it said my cat?
I said CapEx.
So now we know direct routing, if you have a cat, there's an impetus for that. Whoa, where'd he go? He left. He couldn't stand it. I said, I joked and Scott left. He couldn't take that.
I think I'm out.
I'm back.
So real quickly, Scott, that's great. And you're bringing this with your perspective from coming from the consulting field. Sue, you were at a competitor. And so where you had a lot of customers who, again, had on-prem and all that. So what are some of the key takeaways that you've seen with this or that you're thinking about?
Well, a lot of my customers, the majority of them are on-prem, but a lot of them, and it has a lot to do with money, from a CapEx, expenditure to they want to be more of an operational expenditure, just from a finance accounting perspective, the way things work. And that means that they want to move more to a monthly subscription. right? Versus paying for it
Yeah.
all up front. But then that aside, there also has been a huge driver to push to the cloud for many reasons. The pandemic is the one that really pushed that to make that happen for a lot of our customers. So a lot of the customers were looking for a purely cloud solution, but also maintain the same features that they know and love with on-prem. You know, so be able to call part, being able to page, being able to transfer, consult transfer, blind transfer, all of that, still having those features and functionality, but in an all cloud solution.
So two quick things. One of them is I'm going to call on Kendra in a second, and it's about the data sharing. But the first thing is, and when something just like a little light bulb in my head. I'm slow to the table, so it takes me a little. But when you were talking about wanting to move to the cloud base and liking a monthly subscription, and then this combined with what talking about earlier by having that single, that carrier that you're connecting to, it would seem that if you're a customer who's like, look, we need to hedge our bets because Microsoft, yeah, we love you today, but we may not tomorrow. This gives me some flexibility, right? Because now if I decide to go with another solution, it's cloud-based, it's providing similar capability, it would be a much easier proposition to move, keep those numbers, do all that. It's just look, once I'm in the cloud, now I don't have that huge investment on the CapEx. That's what I was looking for, and you said it. I don't have that big CapEx I got to, ink out over time. I can be flexible. It can be monthly. And if if they tire with us, they could move to a competitor who's doing something similar in the cloud. That's my first.
That's even true. I'm just going to add this because you're hitting so many notes that even from an analytics perspective, I think about. One, when you're in the cloud, you can move to any BI tool. When you push your data into your source systems, you can move to any tool. So that's some good things about being mindful about where you might want to be in 10 years. And we're here to help you be where you need to be, not necessarily to lock you into one of our products. I think that's important to call out. As a trusted advisor to my customers, I do think that way too. The other is data security. People are moving to cloud because they don't have the costs, of course, of hardware on-prem, but also there are things that Microsoft provides that you don't have to think about. And some of those are application management and assessing security risk and mitigating for security risk, and whether that's in an application or on a server or in data and how we manage that, we're constantly thinking about that kind of stuff too. So I just wanted to mention that. Data security, cost, cloud, good.
Well, and I had a question for you, Kendra, because that number, well, they're not numbered, but under data sharing, they talk about having the different data that's available, provided to the operators, and also that you can, both direct and operator connect.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that just a bit about, if you want to do any kind of analytics to open APIs?
Well, really interesting. I have not actually seen this yet, so I don't have a hands-on or even conceptual idea of this particular capability. I'm going to guess, though, that there's a database, probably SQL Server, housing this information. And because of that, with Power BI, if you wanted to and you had access to it, you could use one of the native connectors in Power BI, point to that data source in the cloud, which doesn't require a gateway, so it's easy peasy, and then pull that data in and do your analytics. In fact, one of the slides that was shown earlier had a couple of key analytics there in the form of a card that had a total number of customers and my customers. And I remember looking at that going, oh, there's some analytics built in here. That's great. So I would imagine that you can not only point to those data sources and create analytics and fairly easily, and you could possibly even share those analytics out as well, as long as you use some governed approach for that. You wouldn't want to share that across your whole organization, but we have capabilities to be able to lock that down for you and bubble it up to your executives and create some prescriptive plans based on that.
No, that's great. That's exactly what I was getting at. That, you know,
Mhm.
if there are APIs that are open and they providing some of this data, you don't just have to take any canned reports. There's the opportunity to possibly create, you know, custom ones for you.
That's in a lot of our products too. You can tap into just about anything. Dynamics on the back end, Azure features, of course, anything you want, really.
So that's probably a great. We probably down the road might want to do a deeper dive on the CDR, CQD things.
Sure.
So Microsoft has been investing in this for a while with the call detail records and the quality dashboard. So those analytics do exist today natively in Teams. So they're often used for troubleshooting. Oh, my call this wasn't great. Why was it not great? And it gives you that ability that you can go in and look at those analytics and be deterministic, or at least get some information on whether it could have been, you know, a network issue or a device issue, whether it's something systemic for multiple users. So that's been there for a while, and there's been a lot of investments there. And I'll also mention that there are some third parties out there that have been in the space for many years. So there are some third party analytics providers specifically in the voice quality space. So they do exist, and they also consume this data and have the ability to represent this data in their lens and optics. So that also exists as well.
Can you give a couple of examples if you know of any just off the top of your head?
Sure. There's really three main in this space. It's really IR prognosis, Nectar, and Unify Square. So those are the three main voice analytics vendors out there, providers, and they all have capabilities of being able to analyze previous Skype for Business data and now Teams data around voice analytics.
That's interesting.
All right. So if people want to get more information around Operator Connect, what should they do?
So there's actually a slide here that I'll talk about. So we do have a slide. So you can go to aka.ms/Microsoft Teams calling. There's also a couple of free trials out there, you know, there for greater than 300 users for /E5 trial, as well as /business voice trial for under 300 users. There's also some things around fast track. So you can also go to aka.ms/fast track voice. And then we also have some customer scenarios that you can actually look at some references around /Teams calling customers.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Any last comments?
If I remember right, this was announced at Ignite, wasn't it?
It was announced at Ignite that this was coming, and then it became in preview a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. So I guess about the beginning of June. So I know as soon as it became available, I started hitting up, and as soon as it started getting populated, because it was getting populated in people's tenants with the operator voice blade under your voice blade. I started to communicate with some of these guys that were part of the first wave and say, hey, let's talk. Let's see if we can get some demo, get some demo numbers so that I can play with this on my tenant and also, marketize this and go where we are. But yeah.
I just wasn't sure if Ignite would be another place for people to go and get some more training. That's why I asked.
There would be some information around the initial communications around Operator Connect. So, it's been out there for a while, so you'll see that. There's also a lot of the third party as well as a lot of the MVP guys. They've been blogging about this a while since Ignite, so there's a lot of information that's out there.
Excellent. Any last things before we wrap up?
I'm good.
Good. I got food waiting, so I want to thank. I got to eat before my next Viva presentation. I want to thank everybody. Our panel. This is great, and certainly take a look at the slide. We'll have those posted up. As always, you can find us not only on our blog at aka.ms/ aka.ms/HLS blog. That's aka.ms/HLS blog. But if you want to take MidDay Cafe on the go, you can find us on Apple iTunes. You can find us on Spotify, as well as on Google Podcasts. But certainly share, if you have colleagues working in this space who would benefit from this knowledge, share the blog, share this post with them. And we will see you next week. We're going to be doing a multi-prong with everybody kind of getting a little taste of something in there. I'm going to leave it at that. But
it's going to be awesome. It's going to be great, though.
Be awesome.
It's going to be great. Yeah.
It's always awesome. And with that, this is Mike and
Scott,
Sue,
Kendra.
bidding you have a great day. Take care, everyone. And as always, ciao.
See ya.
bye.
Bye.